take my phone off of privacy mode.
Oh, actually, you know what? I'm so sorry. Let me go on do not disturb, because if somebody calls me,
Okay.
it will stop.
Good.
Okay. All right.
طيب. So بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين وبعد. I commence in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. I send salutations of prayers and peace upon the finality of prophets and messengers, Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and all who follow him in righteousness until the day of judgment. Brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, today we are blessed to be here with our sister Alia Botalkke. I got to get it right, inshallah. And alhamdulillah, she's an immigration lawyer, alhamdulillah, with a lot of wonderful experience. I was blessed to, mashallah, have a session with her in Spanish, and I found so much benefit that I said you have to be back, inshallah, and do something in the English language so that we can benefit as well in English. So, Sister Alia, assalamu alaikum, inshallah, commence by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you're from, inshallah ta'ala, how you got into the profession you got into, inshallah.
Wa alaikum salam. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to your program. So a little bit about me, as you mentioned, I am an attorney. I was raised in a multicultural household, in the United States. I was born in New York. My father's from Egypt. My mom's Latina. She's from Puerto Rico. So, I was raised in this amazing home with all different, types of cultures. But I did take the path to move, to become an attorney. However, it wasn't something that I chose, right away. I always say that I feel like it was Allah chose me to take this path. Because initially I was just like most other Muslim sisters, I got married when I was really young, I had children, and, just trying to live your life and just kind of move forward in life. But Allah kept bringing me to this path, and I think He brought me here. And maybe I don't know. Maybe it's I'm helping people. I'm able to help others. I hope that that's the case, that I can help other people. I really do love what I do. I love the law, and I think that it's very important for Muslims, for people of color, ethnic people, anyone outside the quote unquote legal norm, right, to be a part of the legal system. It's extremely important, because the legal system is a breathing, living beast, and it changes according to public opinion. It changes according to the public norms. And so without voices, outside voices, of the standard, I guess, American, Caucasian, male, then nothing is ever going to change. There's never going to be a positive change for our communities and other communities as well out there. And I think, maybe that's why Allah brought me to this path, because He wanted me to have a voice. But I believe that many other people should also, follow this path and put their voices in, whether it's, legal as an attorney, or in legislation, in, in government. It's very important that we represent, ourselves in the community that is the United States. And even, it's something in Islam that we're supposed to push ourselves forward and be leaders. And that's the only way that we can have a better country for ourselves and for our children to be raised in.
No, I mean, it reminds me of the verse in the Quran where Allah says, "Verily, you are the best nation extracted for mankind." Where you call to the good, you forbid the evil, and you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think that this is part of that process, right? That part of that process is that we need individuals like yourself who, mashallah, are Muslim, and alhamdulillah, especially because you're a woman, you're outwardly Muslim, and mashallah, we are celebrating Women's Month as well, right? This month, inshallah. And it's important for them to be in positions where, mashallah, of professionalism and professionality, and, alhamdulillah, holding these titles and these roles, very important. We were discussing, also the whole issue surrounding immigration and marriages. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because those dynamics were so, subhanAllah, interesting, and how you can, your status here in America can be affected based on things that you do which you may think are Islamically correct or they are Islamically okay, but because you signed paperwork or you agreed to certain things, you can actually affect your status in staying in this country.
Yes, I know. This topic is an extremely interesting one. I mean, and what a lot of people don't realize is that, Sharia law and American laws were based a lot in the Sharia law. I mean, they are, because, when they were putting together, the laws of the United States and just putting together this legal system, they looked at other, because it was formulated by the Masons used all the religions in order to formulate their ideals, right? Which is Islam, Judaism, Christianity. They used it to formulate their ideals. But, in the United States, and I think there's one, the one really interesting topic that we always have, is a hot topic, right? Is the idea of marrying more than one person, more than one woman. And of course, in Islam, it is a legal right for Muslims. It's in the law of Islam that you're allowed to do that. But, we have to take into consideration where we're living and how that legally can affect people's lives. And so people forget that they just look at the cultural aspect, as far as like, okay, well, it's allowed Islamically. Okay, that's great. But sometimes certain things Islamically allowed may not be allowed legally where you're living. And because of that, it can affect the families that you have. So let's say that you are, and I get these situations often. I'm going to say a lot. So it happens a lot. It happens a lot from people who may have, married overseas, and then they come here and they think, well, okay, but my marriage overseas doesn't count. And it's not just in the Muslim community. This is also in other communities. It happens. So you think, oh, well, my marriage didn't count in my home country because that was there. And this is America. So if I marry somebody here, that's okay. But technically, under the law, you are legally, a marriage is a marriage. If it was a marriage under the laws of where you were married, it is a marriage under the laws of the United States. And so what that would mean is you would be married to two people at the same time. Okay. In Islam, a plural marriage is fine. Okay. You can marry up to 4 wives. That's great. Under the laws of the United States, it is not. It is not allowed. It is illegal. You can be arrested. You can be fined. I mean, there's consequences to that. And there's very huge consequences to your immigration case. So let's say, which I've had before, there's a man, he's married overseas. And then he comes here and he marries someone else thinking, well, that marriage doesn't count. And he starts filing papers. Okay, well, maybe because they don't know about that marriage overseas, right? They don't know about that one. He has papers. He gets his papers. His wife here files for him. Everything's hunky dory. We're great. And then he's like, well, I want to bring my kids here to the United States. Okay, so maybe he mentioned his kids on his application. Maybe he didn't. Okay, so the first error you made right there was, if you did not mention your children in the application, you lied. And then you also did never mention their mother, probably. Okay, because you're like, well, that doesn't count. Well, yes, it does count because it was a marriage and you should have disclosed that marriage on your application. But if you did disclose that marriage on your application, you would have disclosed that you were married to more than one person at the same time. And your immigration application that you have submitted would no longer be valid because the marriage you had is no longer valid. Okay. So let's say you're fine. You don't do anything. Like, you don't try to bring your other wife here. You just are like, let me bring my kids. Okay. And then you decide to file to become a citizen. Okay. Well, they may ask about these kids and be like, well, were you married to the mom? Like, it shows that you guys were married when your kids were born, but then where's the divorce decree? You married somebody else, but where's the divorce decree? And you could place yourself into a situation where they could decide to take away your citizenship because they go back and find out that you did a bunch of other stuff when you weren't, you did some things that were incorrect and you were lying on your application. And you could be banned forever from having any immigration benefit whatsoever. They could take away your citizenship. They could take away your kids' citizenship if they gave it to them. And then you're done and you have to leave and you're deported. So, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that this could affect them so negatively. You know, and then even, you know, sometimes you can fix the situation, you know, you have to divorce your other wife and then remarry your second wife again, and but it just becomes a mess. So, you know, we have to think about these things. You know, when you're submitting documents to the government, I mean, these are legal documents. These are, you are swearing that you're telling the truth. And so if you lie, right? I mean, you're lying and you're thinking, well, it's not a big deal. I mean, but it is, because you're lying. And so it could not just affect you and maybe your case, but it could also affect other people's cases. Let's say in an instance, let's say I was the person who, you know, needed papers, and my husband married me and he gave me papers. But then he comes to me and he says, you know what? I'm interested in marrying a second wife. Okay, well, when I signed that paperwork, I said that I am not going to be a polygamist. Okay. So even though I'm not the one who's marrying somebody else, my husband is, and that makes me a polygamist because we are in a plural marriage now. And so I am a polygamist, even though I didn't make that choice. So now my case could possibly be affected because my husband, who I'm still married to, has decided to go into a plural marriage that could affect my paperwork. And now I am lying because I am in a plural marriage when I swore that I was not going to do that, you know, in the United States. And so, you know, a lot of people don't realize that this could become a big issue in their papers because they're thinking, well, it's legal, Islamically, and I can do that, you know, and that's, I mean, and I totally understand that. I mean, I think that that's a personal choice, but if you're in a specific situation where you're having your papers being processed, or, you know, you're processing somebody else's papers or something like that, then those are things you need to stay away from, you know, because you're not a citizen or they're not a citizen. And they just swore that they're not going to do that. And so there could be consequences that are, you know, could come beyond your control, that could
No.
be detrimental to you or your life and your case and your, you know, everything, your marriage.
And you know, subhanallah, I think that you know sometimes people they don't think about all of these things, right? There's
Mhm.
like no foresight and no thinking ahead of things. It's more kind of like, you know, I want to get married, I want to be happy. Maybe this is something that I agree with, and by no stretch of the imagination, I don't want anybody to come in and listen and say that, you know, someone has said that polygamy is wrong and that it shouldn't be practiced according to Islam or any of that. We're not saying that at all. What we're saying, inshallah ta'ala, is that your status can be affected if you have signed on that document and you, mashallah, wrote your little signature on there, and then you go in and you begin to apply this aspect of Islam, which is completely permissible Islamically, but according to the American law, that is a no-no, and it violates and voids that piece of paper that you signed, inshallah ta'ala. You know, and I think that, you know, it's very necessary for us to have this dialogue because I get a lot of these type of calls, right? I get a lot of type of calls where people either say, I want to marry this brother, you know, and perhaps the brother has a wife back home, right? Who he's planning to bring eventually once he gets the paperwork, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like, well, I'll bring you sister, inshallah ta'ala, you know what I mean? And I'll marry you. Because even in this in that situation that you posed, that if as a fix, you know, saying, okay, well, I'll divorce my current wife so that I can remarry my second wife so that she can keep her paperwork. But then in the process of divorcing my first wife also lose rights that she probably already had as well. Insurance, right? Coverage, all of these different things that she's been living under that now she's
Mhm.
going to void all of that so that I can go ahead and get married to the second one and keep her paperwork and her status of correct.
Mhm.
And would these people, even at that point, you know, would the government kind of look at that like, okay, maybe this person is playing games, or you know, or what?
You know, well, I mean, okay, so, you know, I mean, these things have arisen. I mean, there has been times, you know, and this is even in the non-Muslim community, okay, where people have done it because, again, erroneously they thought that the marriage in the United States is not valid. So we've been able to overcome these
Okay.
issues by explaining it away, okay, but I can't say that that's going to happen all the time because, you know, I mean, because I definitely have had this. I had, you know, a non-Muslim, you know, Latino person that he didn't realize, he thought that his ex-wife had divorced. But then when they asked him for his divorce decree, he went and asked her, and she was like, "Oh, I never divorced." And he was like, "What?" And so he realized he was married to two people at the same time. So then he had to get the divorce, which he got, and then he had to remarry his wife, right? And then go through all this process. But so it does happen, and it's that it does happen. So immigration does understand that, but also too, we have to take, I mean, immigration, there's so much marriage fraud that they're very suspicious about situations like this in marriage. And they, there's many times that cases, because I've had people come to me and like, I got divorced, I was married to this lady, and then, I married somebody else in America, and she got me my papers. I divorced my wife, and then I remarried her again for later. And then I tried to bring her here, and it's been 5 years, and they're taking so long with my papers. What's going on? Well, what's going on is that they probably figured out what the heck you're doing, and they don't know what to do with you. And they're trying to figure out, like, is he committing fraud? Like, what is he, And so they just leave you in limbo because technically you did something wrong, but they can't prove it, maybe. And so they just don't want to give you the papers. So they might not. And then so then what do you do in that situation? Well, you end up having to sue the government, and then you're going to have to explain to the government, why they should approve your papers. And I didn't intentionally do this, and I didn't know. And and it just doesn't look good. Right. So you put yourself into a situation where your wife that you want to bring her, to the US, can't come. Your kids could come. They usually let the kids in, right? But then your wife who's out there want to bring her, and you've been waiting for 5 years because you did something fishy, and they are concerned about it, and then they just kind of let the case sit there. And that has happened many times. When they feel something's fishy, a lot of times those cases will drag on because they're trying to discover, and they're looking into it, and we don't realize, but they are. I mean, they'll go to the FBI, they'll go to your country, they will check. They have people go to your country and check and ask people. And, and people think that, oh, no, it's only in the United States. No, it is not. I had a case where they were going to deny the case because they went and asked the neighbors, is this person married to this person? And the neighbors were like, I don't know, and then so they said, well, how, your neighbors didn't even know you're married. So what, is it real? Or like, so they do those things. They do research. They do look into cases. And people don't think that they do, but they do.
Is this because I remember, when I was younger, I don't know if it still happens or not, but I remember it was huge, especially with the South Americans, that they used to pay to get married. Right, you would come and they would give you $5,000-$10,000, and you would marry them for some time, get their paperwork, and then divorce, and everybody would kind of break off, inshallah, and kind of go their own way. Was this something that affected that process?
Yes. Well, so this is the thing. I think, there's a saying like in law that there's a law because somebody broke it or somebody violated it. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, when you have your children, right? You don't know that they're going to do something wrong until they do it. And then you're like, no, that's a rule now. You can't do that anymore. And so that's kind of how it's come about. It's a waste, some of these rules, because people were just doing things and they had to put rules into place to stop these things from happening. So of course, people pay other people, you know what I mean, to get papers. And it's happened. I even saw the other day there was immigration had written a note, and somebody sent a note to immigration and said, and this happens, there's people who are, they're mean, they're just like out to get you.
Wow.
So they sent a note to immigration and said, this lady has a boyfriend. She married this guy. This guy paid her to marry her. Marry her, and she got money. Here's pictures of her and her boyfriend, and that marriage is fake. And they withdrew their papers, and they were like, sorry. So she got marriage fraud case, right? And then later she tried to legitimately marry somebody, and they were like, nope, we don't know if this is real or not. We don't know. You had marriage fraud before, so sorry, So, a lot of that happens. And because that happens so much, even though your marriage could be legitimate or your situation is unintentional, you could get yourself into a problem just because of past history. It's not your mistake, it's other people's mistakes, but you're suffering from that. So
is there a document or something? I'm just kind of like pre-thinking, right? Is there some type of a document that if I was going to marry somebody, for instance, and that person is in the United States, I'm outside of the United States, and I really don't know that if that person is telling me the truth, that they've never been married before, that they're not married anymore, you know what I mean, or that they were married and that they did have a divorce. Is there something that I can sign a way to say, really I'm not sure, or what I mean, how can you verify it ahead of time, kind of, so you don't find yourself in this type of a situation? Because I think it would suck, right, to kind of go through this entire process and you're confiding in this person, especially as a woman, right? As a woman who's confiding in a man completely, who has given herself to him and says, I love you and I want to be with you. And we're just, we're seas apart from each other. And I want to get and close that gap and be together finally. But you don't know what's been happening in that country with that man. And if, he's been 100% with you.
Well, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, one way that you can do, sometimes you could go to the embassies, sometimes the embassies, and it's not, the thing is, like, the embassies are in Washington, D.C., but sometimes the embassies may disclose that information. You can say, look, I'm sponsoring this person and I need, proof that they're no longer married, because, they might not be upfront with you, but I can't say that they will give it to you because it's private information, right? So they may not. It's not, I mean, short of like doing a, private investigator, it's difficult. It's difficult because people hide things. And sometimes in other countries, you can't find that information out unless you actually hire somebody there. You can hire an attorney from that country. A lot of times attorneys can look into information. I've had that happen where we've had to hire attorneys in another country to verify information and get, documents. You could do that. You can hire an attorney from the other country and say, hey, can you look into this? Can you check? Because it's public record. I mean, they should be able to find out. So if you're really concerned, that's something you can do, is try to hire an attorney in the other country and see if that's legit.
Okay.
But most of the time people don't do that because there's emotions involved. I love him. He's so sweet. You know what I mean? I love her. She's amazing. You know what I mean? I get it all the time. Like, I have people come in, I love them so much. I love them. I'm like, it's great. It's perfect. We love that for you. But you have to look into realities too, because sometimes things don't always work out in the way that you want them to.
And then along with that, we were talking about, which is also equally important, the whole issue of the K1 last time, right? When we were talking about the whole issue of now, I have this man, I love him, or I have this female and I love her, and I want to go ahead and be able to come to the United States, inshallah ta'ala, to be with them. And then they call me the Imam and they say, yeah, Imam, can we just do an Islamic marriage? Khalas, let's just do an Islamic marriage, inshallah ta'ala. That way I can at least be married Islamically. And then perhaps they'll bring them over on a K1, inshallah ta'ala. What does that mean? Because I think a lot of people don't understand what that means at all, and the impact that can have.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, there's several things. I mean, it depends also on the country.
Okay.
I've had some countries where the husband and wife will Islamically marry. Okay. And they, go on a trip and they, do all this stuff together. Well, it's an Islamic country. And so sometimes the people, although they're Americans in the embassy, they understand the culture and they understand that men and women do not typically in Islam spend the night together in a hotel room unless they are married. Like, that's very rare, right? So they understand that that's the cultural norm. So then they're going to say, well, are you guys married? And, they'll be like, well, we're not married. We got Islamically married. Okay. Well, Islamic marriage under the laws of the United States is not considered a marriage. However, sometimes the officers, because they may say, well, you guys are technically married, even though it's a religious marriage, okay, we can't give you the K1. Sorry, because this is for a fiance. This is not for married people. Although that's not the correct thing to do, sometimes they do that. And then so what happens is it gets denied, then you have to send it back and you have to fight it. And so you end up wasting time, with this application because you guys got Islamically married and then they are taking that sort of as a real marriage because they understand the culture. But in general, Islamic marriages are not considered marriages for legal purposes whatsoever. So if something happens to you, you die, like your wife or your husband has no rights to anything of yours because it's just an Islamic marriage. So, I mean, and the K1 is, for a fiance, people, I usually do K1s. In the past, K1s were because they want to get them here faster, but
Okay.
that's not necessarily the case anymore. K1s is because you're not sure you want to marry the person. You know, you're not really sure. You still have to have seen them and met them, you know, before you submit the application. So it's not like something where you can do just because you've been talking on the phone and then now I want to bring my fiance over, even though I never met them in person. It doesn't work. You still have to meet them in person. So, you know, I mean, in order to protect each other, the best way, if you are sure you're going to marry this person, is just file the marriage. You know what I mean? Because fiancés, there's no legal right to bring your fiance to the United States, but there is a legal right to have your husband or wife with you in the United States.
And then what happens with the scenario, right? Okay, so I'm on a trip. I'm in Morocco, or I'm in mashallah Mexico or Colombia, and I meet the woman who I meet a Muslim sister who I think mashallah I may want to marry her, but I still got some doubt, right? I'm not sure if if she's being genuine with me or sincere with me, and it could be we can flip it around both ways, right? Whichever way
Yeah.
you look at it. And then I say, well, I'll bring them on the K1, inshallah.
Yeah.
And this person agrees to come on the K1, inshallah. But then afterwards, I change my mind and say, well,
Mhm.
this is not the person I want to be with. You know what I mean? Now, does that what happens with the status of that other person?
So what happens is with that is that person will no longer be, you know, they have no status. So the only status they have is according to your marriage, right? So if they do not marry you, they cannot stay here in the United States. They write a document that says they swear that if they do not marry you within 90 days, that they must return back to their home country. And
Mm,
you, as the petitioner, also swear that you will return them back to their home country. So let's say you change your mind and they're like, well, I'm not leaving. I'm not going nowhere. Well, that person is kind of without any status. And it's very difficult for them to remarry somebody else, and you may still have to be financially responsible for them.
mm,
So there's a form that's called an I-864. It's called an affidavit of support. One of the only ways to kind of get around this is the ex partner or the partner that maybe they did marry them and they divorced right away or something and they never filed the paperwork. And then they decided to go ahead and file. Like one of the only ways around it is, let's say they did marry them, but then they decided they didn't want to continue the paperwork, so they never did. But that person ended up staying here. It happens, okay?
mm,
And then maybe 2 years, 3 years later, they decided they want to marry somebody else. Well, you, as the person who married them, still have to do that form, which is called the I-864 affidavit of support, saying that I will be financially responsible for this person until, you know, there's a certain time frame that they're, you know, you're supposed to be responsible for that. So you may still be required to do that because that's the only way that they'd be able to adjust under somebody else. Most people are not going to want to do that. Like, you're not going to do it. You know, many people won't, unless you're being kind and you don't want to harm, you know, your partner because you just decided you don't want to be with them anymore. And you say, okay, well, I'll do it because, you know, I don't want to harm your life forever. And then they do it. But that's like one of the, there's very few ways around it. Especially if you never married, because if you never married, you can't marry somebody else. There's not another person that can sponsor you because that's just the way it works. That application is done. You didn't marry the person you're supposed to marry, and you can't really do much else. It's very hard
mm.
to get around that. Yeah.
Inshallah.
So
The last thing, inshallah ta'ala, because I know you're on a tight schedule today, inshallah, was that I think was important as well that we talked about in Spanish was the whole Violence Against Women and Children Act, right? And then
yeah.
people being able to, if someone is manipulating them and trying to use the status of trying to, I can send you back home, you know what I mean? Or you do what I say, or, you know what I mean? You don't leave the house, or, whatever it may be in terms of some type of abuse, physical, mental, emotional. How does that person protect themselves, and relinquish that fear that they have of losing their status and being sent back home?
So unfortunately, you know, there are people who use their spouse's status to control the situation, and I've had it happen a lot. It's very sad. And it's not just for men doing it to women; it's women doing it to men as well. It happens a lot. You know, I mean, um, either sex, they use it as a way to control their partner, to manipulate them into doing things that they may not want to do, or, you know, as a way of just abusing them in general. You know, so I've had people, well, they'll hold papers over their partner's head forever. Well,
Mm.
if you buy me the house, then I will do it. If you pay this bill, and then I will do it. If you do this for my mom, then I will do it. If you are a better cleaner or a better wife, then I will do it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
that's abuse. This is abuse. Like, you know, it doesn't, because people think like abuse is only just that they're hitting them or that they're you know, some kind of physical harm. But no, mental abuse is abuse. So if you are in fear of your status, that you're going to be thrown on the street, that your children are not going to have a home, and that you're going to be deported back to your home country because your partner is using this to control the situation, there is a way out of it. You can file a self petition. Okay. And the spouse does not have to leave their husband or wife. They can still file this application on their own, but obviously they have to cite, you know, this abuse. It's not just like, oh, just because, you know, they don't want to file my paperwork, like I can, there has to be reasoning behind it. There has to be affidavits, you know, there could be neighbors, you know, or their parents that are, you know, because sometimes there could be, let's say there's a person, they're vulnerable, they come here to the US, and even under K1. Okay. So they came here K1 and the person married them. All right. But then they said, oh, I'm not going to file your green card right now. Let's just wait and see how things go. And then I'll file it. I'm not going to do this right now. And I'm, you know what I mean? And so they keep them in this like limbo status, right, for a long time because they're not sure or their spouse isn't doing everything that they wanted from them. And then I'll file the paperwork. So you can get yourself out of that situation by filing your own paperwork, but again, documenting that you're actually married, the person is a citizen or a resident, you know, that you live together, that your marriage is legitimate. You also have to document all of those things, that the marriage is legitimate, and that there's some kind of harm happening. It doesn't have to be, you know, the affidavits don't have to be from people in the US. It could be maybe your family overseas. Maybe your mom sent you over here to marry this guy thinking everything's hunky dory. And then, you know, great. And then he's terrible to you. And so then you telling your mom, like, oh my God, he doesn't let me out of my house. You know, I can't, you know, I have to like, basically, I'm basically like a servant, you know, here. And you know, I can't live like this anymore. So, you know, it's important to understand that you have rights, that there is a way out, that you don't have to suffer. And even sometimes husbands or wives, they will go overseas and leave their spouse there,
Mm.
there, and abandon, you know, because there's men who do that. They'll marry somebody, bring them here, have, you know, whatever, they have their thing, and then they're like, you know, I'm sick of this person. I'm not, you know, let's go on a trip. We're gonna go on a trip, and then they go back home and they just leave them there, or go back somewhere else and just leave them there, and then they're stranded. Well, you have a remedy. You can contact the embassy. You can let them know that this happened. You can file that application even though you're not in the United States, and still get your rights. But you have to do it while you're still married to that person, or after. If you did divorce, it has to be within 2 years of the divorce.
And then also, I remember that you mentioned that if they were to, apply or put in this application for this, that they don't necessarily tell the spouse that this
No,
application is being put in.
no, they
So you
not tell
don't
the
have to worry
spouse.
about that.
Mm-mm. So this application is basically very well protected. So let's say I called immigration and said, "Hey, I want to know, you know, so and so, does they have application?" I mean, immigration in general doesn't like to give information over the phone. It's very rare. But maybe you got information, you know, somehow, and you were able to call them. They don't really give. They do not give any information of these applications over the phone. They will not. They will. So it's very protected. Yeah.
Mashallah. You know, I just want to let the crowd know. I think these things are very important for us to know. Unfortunately, a lot of us make these different types of mistakes, or we may fall into these situations, you know, because of love, right? Because or because sometimes even just maybe it may not even be love. It may just be I'm looking for a better opportunity, and maybe this is my shot, and I'm going to go ahead and take this shot, inshallah ta'ala. But alhamdulillah, we see that, you know, there can be a lot of difficulties. There can be a lot of challenges that you may find in that path, inshallah ta'ala. And that alhamdulillah, Islam is about prevention. This is what Islam is about. Islam is all about prevention. Islam is about, mashallah, making sure that you kind of got all your ducks in a row so that inshallah ta'ala marriage is something sacred. You don't want to do this as an overnight thing, inshallah ta'ala. You want to make sure that you're protected. You want to make sure that, inshallah ta'ala, somebody's not going to take advantage of you, inshallah ta'ala, and then just leave you out there. Even when Sister Alia mentioned that, you can apply for this domestic abuse or this, emotional abuse or whatever it is, and then you can still stay married to the person. Even Islamically, you have the right to ask for divorce as well, and free yourself from any domestic violence, and free yourself from any emotional violence, free yourself from anything that's affecting you spiritually and keeping you from that relationship that you're supposed to have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you have the law, alhamdulillah, here in America protecting you, inshallah ta'ala, as well as you have, mashallah, the law in terms of Islam as well, that protects you from these things, because these are your rights, inshallah ta'ala. And I think it's important for you to know your rights. And this is why we wanted to, mashallah, bring on Sister Alia, especially during this month of Women's Month, inshallah ta'ala, and, show, the necessity for this, and also, mashallah, show the appreciation that, mashallah, we do have women who are well qualified and, mashallah, intelligent and at the forefront, fighting on behalf of causes that we need people to fight on behalf of, inshallah ta'ala. Sister Alia, I know we only have a few minutes left, inshallah ta'ala. I know there's a brother in the comment section that he mentioned that he needs some legal help. So, inshallah ta'ala, if you can kind of give the people the contact for you. He says he lives in Ohio, and he needs a way or format that he can get in contact with you, inshallah ta'ala. So if you say it slowly, I'll put the number up here for him, inshallah.
Inshallah. So my office is in Fairfax, Virginia, but we do practice all over the United States, because immigration law, I can practice, all over the United States. So that's not an issue. My office number is 703-546-8532. And you can also email me at info@Botalkke Law. So BOLTAKKE law.com. And I would be happy to, respond to your questions. I get a lot of questions on Facebook. I would be happy to, I try to respond to as many questions as I can on Facebook. I get a lot. So if I don't get to you like the same day that you message me, just be patient, because I will get to you. But I'm happy to also respond to questions. Some questions are very complicated, so it's better to have a consultation. We talk personally about it. It's better to do that. But this topic of the plural marriage, like in Islamic law and American law, there's a lot of things that we have to be educated about, especially when it comes to family cases, because I think most of the time where it intersects tends to be family cases, where it affects us. The law of the United States will take into consideration, Islamic law. So if you guys had a marriage contract, I know, we do marriage contracts, right? And we put in there things that's important, because it's something that you can use later if you need to, in terms of when you're trying to file for a divorce, or, because it's proof of agreements that you had prior. And this is another way, that although, polygamy in the United States is not legal, it is legal for Islamic purposes, under Islam, it's legal, but you can, in a marriage contract, protect yourself sometimes, because you can take that person to court. So let's say you have children in that relationship. Those children are still required by law to be provided for. If you guys have made a legal contract together, sometimes these contracts can be fulfilled in the American courts, and because as long as the courts find that it was a valid contract, they can fulfill it. So sometimes you can remedy some of these issues as far as rights, but a lot of times it's harder, because rights of inheritance, certain, there could be a lot of dispute there, especially if there is a legitimate wife that is legally married to that husband.
One last thing, inshallah, if you don't mind, Sister Alia, and you can summarize it as fast as you can, inshallah, and then I'll let you go. You had mentioned something last week, and I want you to kind of highlight it, inshallah ta'ala, for our youth, that, there was a case where someone got caught up just being in the wrong place at the wrong time with resident status. And because of this, they end up losing their resident status and being sent back home where there is no family, because all of their family is here in the United States. So I think it's important for our youth that may be listening, inshallah ta'ala, and for our parents, you know what I mean, that have their kids who aren't, citizens and stuff like that just yet and haven't reached the age of 18, to kind of take into consideration.
Well, these cases, these are the cases that really break your heart. These are the cases that super break your heart. So, and I've had happen more than on one occasion. And it's just because, as kids, they're green card holders. They don't understand the difference of being a citizen or difference of being, a green card holder. Everybody thinks they're all the same. But if your friends who are citizens are doing something that's illegal, okay, they drink, it could be drugs, gang, involving in gangs. There's certain things that are pretty serious that you can't get away from. It's the drug trafficking, drug stuff, drug possession, drug trafficking, the violent crimes, crimes related to, drinking. I mean, there's just so many things, right? So, but typically it's the bad stuff, like the drug stuff, the violent crimes, and gang violence. Okay. But we had a case. There was a kid, super, super lovely kid, great kid, super smart kid. Okay. He had so much potential and he was getting somewhere in life, and he had family here that were supporting him. And he just happened to get himself into a bad situation. He got, I don't know, in schools, they have stupid things. They're like, I'm part of this gang. I'm like, what? And so they took it seriously here. And so he ended up getting a conviction of being involved in a gang. Okay. So immigration picked him up because that's serious stuff. They do not play games with that. And then, you can lose your green card status because of these types of convictions. And it's happened so many times. I've had so many beautiful children, so much potential, and then they get caught up with being with the wrong people. I had one poor kid, he was in jail for like 3 years. And he did nothing himself. He was in the car waiting with his friends thinking they're going out somewhere, and one of the other guys went and robbed something, came back. Well, in the United States, if you're involved in a felony, everybody's in the felony. It doesn't even matter if you did it. It's just because you were there. You also get the convictions. And then, he was deported. He was deported, and all his family's here. His mom's here. His sister's here. His brother's here. All of his family is here. He has nobody there. So he's going to go back home as a young adult with nothing. And it's very difficult to come back to that and come back to the United States. It's very hard. So, I mean, you don't want to put yourself in that situation. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for you. It's heartbreaking for the attorneys helping you. It's heartbreaking for your family. It's really important that, one, either you become a citizen as soon as you can, which is 18, or your parents become citizens as soon as they can so that you can become a citizen, or don't get yourself involved in stuff. I mean, just don't.
And it reminds me of that beautiful hadith in closing, inshallah ta'ala, فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِ, right? Let every one of you look to whom you befriend. فَالرَّجُلُ عَلَى دِينِ خَلِيلِهِ, right? That the man is upon the religion of his friend. And in this case, association brings about assimilation, unfortunately, and then you end up in a bad situation because of associating with a person who, maybe you don't have those traits and maybe you don't have those intentions, but, as they say, you get caught in the khalas, it can be joyriding, you get put inside. And actually, interesting you mentioned that, because my cousin, when he first came from Puerto Rico to the United States, to Jersey specifically, he was here maybe a month, and he went and bought a bag of weed, a bag of marijuana, and they caught him driving away on the bicycle, and then they put him as part of the entire drug ring.
Oh, wow.
He was the delivery boy, and this guy was the head, and this guy was the one who was watching out, and he was the one taking the pack, and all he was doing was going and buying something for himself personally, and he ended up doing months in jail, and then having to do probation in the whole 9 yards. Alhamdulillah, we don't have the deportation problem happen, but this is kind of just shows you that you get caught up in a ring that you're not even involved in, inshallah ta'ala. So the shabab, be careful, inshallah ta'ala. If your parents.
Well, I mentioned because the thing is, and I think I mentioned last week too, that it's not just young kids, because as residents, and I had the story, and this story is like, I always use this story because it's like so crazy. So there was a young mom, okay, she was, she came here from outside the United States, and she's just been a resident for a short time. She was going to school, she's trying to be a teacher, and she had a little boy. There was a girl on the playground that pushed her son and hurt him, okay? So she comes to the little girl, I mean, she was like maybe 12 or 13, and she just kind of like taps her on the shoulder like moms do, okay? And the girl started screaming, saying that she's hitting me, da da da. The police were called, and she was slapped with an assault charge. Okay, so she's a green card holder, assault charge. This could have effects on her in the future. Not only just her green card status, but maybe she wanted to be a teacher. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many things there. And it's just crazy because these things can happen in situations you would never expect. So as we have to be super careful and super vigilant, especially if our papers are not 100%, we have to be careful. And people are very hot to call the police. Okay, they're super hot to call the police, but the police are not. Oh, I mean, yes, the police in emergency. Somebody is dying. There's a gun in your face. There's, they're there to protect you for those things. But there's some other situation where there's a disturbance. There's nothing. There's something you guys can work out. But the police come there, and they tend to come there to arrest somebody.
Yeah.
Or give somebody, a citation or something. So they don't usually walk away without giving somebody something.
No.
So, we have to be wary of that and understanding that, yes, we have rights. Yes, there's, situations where we must call the police, but there's also other situations where you're going to be creating more problems than you really want in that situation. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line.
MashaAllah. Khair, inshallah, Sister Alia, brothers and sisters, I thank you all for being with us, inshallah ta'ala. If you have any other questions, like always, feel free to put them in the chat, inshallah, below. And inshallah, we can always forward those questions to Sister Alia and try to get answers for them. Sister Alia's information, again, 703-546-8532 for the brother who just asked, 703-546-8532. That is the number to her office, inshallah ta'ala. And all of her other information is within the chat as well. Sister Alia, any last words?
Thank you so much for inviting me here. As always, I try to be the best advocate for my clients, and I want people to understand that they have certain rights, because if you know your rights, then you can prevent negative situations from happening to you. So that's the most important thing, is to educate yourself. Do not let yourself sit in the dark. Be educated. Go out and find the information. Go out and ask people that are trustworthy, that can help you, and look for help if you really need it, inshallah. So
MashaAllah. May Allah reward you, Sister Alia. May Allah bless you and your family, keep you guys safe from COVID and every other evil. Ameen. Jazakallah khair again, inshallah ta'ala, and we hope that we can benefit some more from you in the future, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you.